United States Customs and Border Protection, CBP. With a workforce of more than 60,000 and a budget approaching $18 billion, U.S. Customs and Border Protection is our nation's largest law enforcement organization and carries the responsibility of keeping terrorists and their weapons out of the U.S. while facilitating lawful international travel and trade. Its history dates to 1789. CBP is the United States' first unified border entity, and the agency takes a comprehensive approach to border management and control, combining customs, immigration, border security, and agricultural protection into one coordinated and supportive activity. As CBP Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner, Office of Field Operations, Diane Sabatino oversees operations of the largest component in CBP and is responsible for border security, including anti-terrorism, immigration, anti-smuggling, trade compliance, and agriculture protection, while simultaneously facilitating the lawful trade and travel at U.S. ports of entry. Deputy EAC Sabatino began her career as an immigration inspector at JFK International Airport. She has held numerous leadership positions, including Acting Director Field Operations Baltimore, Acting Port Director JFK, and Assistant Port Director MIA. John Wagner, former Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner, Field Operations, and driving force behind such technology-driven programs as Global Entry, Mobile Passport Control, and Biometrics for Facial Recognition, will join his successor in a candid discussion about the CBP today, its reliance on a range of advanced technologies in support of its mission portfolio, and the road ahead in terms of technology and CBP mission performance. EDGE 2021 is pleased to welcome two distinguished leaders, the former and current Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioners of U.S. Customs and Border Protection.
It's quite a long walk. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're the final presentation, so we're here in the home stretch. So thank you, everyone, for sticking with us for the next 30 minutes or so while we talk about Customs and Border Protection. It's last time I spoke at CES Government, I was in the deputy role in field operations, and thank you for having us back again this year. We just always have great, exciting stuff we always wanted to talk about. But since that time, I retired. It's actually been 1 year today. So Diane has been an old friend and colleague for many, many years. So don't worry, CBP's in good hands. And we saved the best presentation for last, right? So Diane and I have worked together for many, many years, so it was great to see that she was selected to be the deputy and lead field ops into the foreseeable future. She's already done a much better job than me in the year that she's been there. Diane, I always looked at Customs and Border Protection, and I always felt fortunate enough to join an organization and grow up in an organization and government that always prided itself on its innovative culture and drive, and we used to challenge ourselves that it's never good enough, it's never fast enough, we can always improve, we can always automate, and we can always do something better. And I think that served us well, over the years, and we look at the different technology things we've done, and we're going to talk about all this, the data analytics, the non-intrusive inspection systems, facial recognition, this kind of world effort we kicked off and really started this in the travel arena, introducing and really forwarding and advancing the use of facial recognitions from a security perspective, but also a facilitative perspective. And we never lost sight of that dual mission, which some people saw as competing, but we always saw it as, hey, good enforcement is good facilitation, and good facilitation is good enforcement, because we had such a role in driving the economy. But in the past year, with the disruptions in travel and the pandemic, the borders, parts of it are closed, part of it are closed to certain segments of travel. But by and large, the border has to remain open. Cargo still has to come through. We've seen disruptions with the supply chain. Critical travel for people still needs to happen. So the economy still needs to go, and CBP still needs to be there, out there processing people and cargo. So over the past year or so, what kind of things have you been working on, to keep the employees safe, keep the public safe, but also find better ways, to look at how do you do your mission with these additional constraints now and these additional concerns that are out there? And, what are some of the cool things that you've been working on to do that?
No, thank you. And, certainly advancing national security, as you pointed out, goes hand in hand, right, with facilitating lawful travel and trade. And over the past really year and a half, we've seen a pretty significant drop off in travel. Passengers in the air and maritime environment, certainly, and the land border environment, the travelers coming across. We're only at about 60% of what we were in 2019. But we have seen some modest increases, right, as travel restrictions are lifted. But we haven't been sitting idly by. Certainly on the trade side of the house with the cargo movements, 90,000 entries a day, $6.6 billion worth of goods arriving every single day. A lot of work to do in that space. Mail didn't stop. Express consignment. We saw increases, obviously, with e-commerce coming online. But with that travel drop-off, we certainly took the opportunity to dedicate resources, to those other environments, certainly to enhance. We couldn't be the challenge with holding things up. We certainly weren't sitting at home. Our officers, our agriculture specialists, about 25,000, a little over 25,000 CBP officers, about 2,600 agriculture specialists, and then about 1,000 trade specialists out in the field. But looking at ways to automate how we do business, I think the pandemic certainly gave us the opportunity to take advantage of new technologies. What could we do remotely? What could we do in terms of, applied logic? Certainly in the targeting field, we get a lot of advanced information. And the pandemic put us in a position where we had restrictions, proclamations that came down in particular in the air environment, where we had to offload hundreds of thousands of individuals or cancel ESTAs for individuals that had anticipated coming to the U.S. And we could not, it would have cost us hundreds of man hours and probably several weeks, if not months of work to do that. But we took advantage of a great Office of Information Technology, our wonderful partners in CBP, who without we would not be able to accomplish anything that we do besides protecting, us from the cyber threats. Taking, automated logic and applying it to, all of our manual processes, where we took what could have been weeks or months of work and turned it into a couple of days.
Wow. CBP innovation, right? Always challenging ourselves, right? Never just sitting back and saying, well, just let it stack up. We'll get to it when we get to it. But always trying to be ahead of things. And I look at the facial recognition work we kicked off under, some long-standing requirements to take biometrics from departing visitors and the challenges in doing so with the logistics and the technology and just how to do that. And we found success by developing a solution that was broader than our limited focused mandate. We brought in the airlines, we brought in the airports, we took on the passenger experience as part of this, and we turned something that really could have had a bad impact on travel, and we turned it actually into a facilitative measure and really improving the travel experience. What we didn't realize at the time is we were going to be faced with this global pandemic, but we were building a touchless experience already, a tokenless experience. And as we emerge out of this pandemic now and people start traveling again, people are going to be a lot more cognizant of what they touch at the airport, right? Or even our own officers handling the documents. So I'm curious to hear what's the latest on the facial recognition. Obviously the airports and airlines have financial constraints. CBP has some financial constraints, and where do you see us moving with this? How quickly? What's been the public uptick? And we should probably talk a little bit about some of the privacy concerns and and how we're addressing a lot of that. And then in the cruise environments and maybe the land border too.
I have to say it was a really exciting time, despite the challenges, to come into this role in CBP. Wholly, if not mostly, in part of because of all the work that you had done in getting us to where we were with the facial biometrics. And in the air environment, over the last year, we have really accelerated the deployment of the facial biometric comparison technology for international arriving travelers. So even though travel is down in the air environment, by the end of we were hoping for the end of the fiscal year, but it looks like it's going to be more like the calendar year. We'll be at almost 100% of all arriving international air passengers arriving to the U.S. that will experience that touchless process. And we know that the future is digital travel documents. So, we're already looking, down the road for that. And here we have this process that's already well underway. That was for security enhancement. It was for, the streamlined passenger experience wound up being a significant benefit because of the pandemic and limiting the transmission of pathogens. In the maritime environment, we did have our first 2 cruise ships start turning around, one in Port Everglades and one in Galveston. And they are already taking advantage of the TVS DBARC, that's the Traveler Verification System, which is the backbone that you work with OIT to build for the facial biometric comparison technology. So the cruise ships in DBARC, what used to be a CBP process where we would queue up people for up to an hour at times after they finished, packing, had their breakfast, came off the ships, now has turned into a couple of minutes process for the person at DBARC, right at the jet bridge, at the gangway in most instances, where their traveler coming off the vessel is processed and doesn't have to speak to a CBP officer or agriculture specialist unless we would like to speak to them. And a lot of it also, because the groundwork is there with the advanced information in both the air environment and the maritime environment, the work we do with our stakeholders to receive that in advance, and we can vet out the information in the individuals. The land border environment, a unique environment for travel because it's kind of that last frontier where we don't have advanced information. That's the vision. But certainly we've deployed simplified arrival to the pedestrian environment of the land border. We have it at about 32 ports of entry now on both the southern border and the northern border. A considerably enhanced experience for those travelers, still working through the testing to get it through the deployment for simplified arrival vehicle, which hopefully we'll have in 2 test locations in production, one in August and one in October, so very exciting. But that is really going to be the significant game changer for us and how we streamline traffic, because sure, where some of the challenges we've been having on the southwest border, we can't just focus on what the challenge is. We have to focus on the legitimate travel and trade because they so intimately are tied together.
Right. Do you think, you mentioned earlier digital travel credentials. I don't know enough about them to see what they do and can't do, but is there an opportunity there to look at, could you have your passport or your permanent resident card or your border crossing card or your passport card in a digital form, and what opportunities might that have to further streamline and automate things and maybe get to that advanced information, just every advantage you can give CBP to prepare?
Well, I think certainly taking on the vision that you had in the air environment, the true curb to gate. And we've been working very closely with our partners in the Transportation Security Administration to help them roll out, leveraging the Traveler Verification System backbone to implement the facial biometric comparison technology at their checkpoints. Now, certainly we have the information for the international travelers, either U.S. passport, photos, or visas, and working with them to identify, certainly through the pre-check and an opt-in program where we can deploy that in the air environment. But looking forward to when that digital identity piece, and right, what is that token that's going to link it? And it, I mean, the facial seems to be the best opportunity for it, and you're well aware we did the testing obviously with iris and fingerprints, intimidating processes. It can be challenging for individuals who aren't, frequent business travelers, but to your point earlier on, everyone can take a photo.
Right. It's easy.
It's
Everybody
intuitive.
knows how to have their picture taken,
Everyone
right?
knows how to take a selfie.
Look at the camera and smile. And because of the nature of your work, you're dealing with people from all parts of the globe, all different ages, all different language capabilities, but everyone from little kids to older people, everybody knows how to smile at the camera and have your picture taken. And I think the advantage we had in the US is we had the databases to compare people against. So, we weren't going into social media sites, we weren't using surveillance footage. We really automated a process that it was already required. You're already required to establish your identity at the airport. And an officer or airline employee would hold up the passport and try to say, is that the same person in this little picture here? And really just using an algorithm to help that person make a more efficient decision. But what I really liked about it is what we could do for those workers, our own employees at the time, the airport employees. You think of how many documents they have to touch and handle, right? Because people put their passports in their mouth while they're carrying their bags and their coffee, right? And then they hand it to you, right? How many times have you seen that? And yeah, they were in gloves, but it's not like they changed the gloves in between passengers either. So if there's, say, germs on one document, they're just going to transfer it to the next document, right? So, how do we break those practices and keep everybody safe, the public and the employees and the frontline employees working there? And how do we build out these capabilities beyond our own parochial needs? But you mentioned it, offering the same service because it's already built. So what does it take to hook up TSA to that? What does it take to hook up the airline services to that? So you're checking a bag, maybe you're going to other parts of the airport. What's the legality of doing it? You mentioned it. Is it an opt-in provision? And then how do we advise the public of what their options are? Which brings us to the privacy discussion, which I think is a good one. And there's a lot of discussion in law enforcement use of this technology. There's discussions about why it's different at the airport. But anything on the privacy front or that with the rulemaking that was out there, and there's been some modifications, it'll have to go out at some point. But how's the privacy discussion going, and where's things at with that?
I think it's been interesting. I think you have been through 2 prior administrations and done the education campaign and really what our business use case is. So it's been an interesting time with this new administration coming on board and really educating what the business case is for CBP and making the distinctions between people's perceptions of facial recognition being that surveillance tool, where for CBP our business use case is, and it's oversimplifying, it's saying it, but we've automated the manual document check that we have done in the past with technology that's better than our officers to do that. And certainly working through the notice of proposed rulemaking to really, flesh out the regulatory framework, but reaching out to the privacy advocacy groups and articulating this is the use of the facial biometric comparison against a small gallery of images based on the advanced information that we have at a time and a place where an individual would normally expect to present themselves for identity verification. We're not taking cameras and looking broadly into the crowd. This is really that automated process. And we've had great success with it, certainly in streamlining the process, which frankly wasn't the goal. The goal was to enhance the security and get better at identifying and making sure we knew who people were. But that streamlined process, the facilitation byproduct of that, all of our stakeholders in the airport and the maritime environments are very excited about what we've been able to do, and then the added health benefit of it.
Yeah.
But then that security aspect, when we started the deployments in the southwest border environment and pedestrian, where we had identified about 300 imposters up until in the first several years of the deployment. In the first 3 months, we identified 300 imposters at the southwest land border, and that was just with a few rollouts. And that's not to say that our officers wouldn't have intercepted any of those individuals themselves. However, it takes that administrative burden off of them and allows for a more seamless process. We've also taken the facial biometric comparison technology and implemented it in practices where we've had policy changes. We had the migrant protection protocols on the southwest border, where previously the policy was to have migrants wait south of the border or outside of the U.S. for their hearings and to make their asylum claims. With a change in administration, to bring those individuals back in could have been up to a 1 to 2 hour process per person, with a population of about 25 to 30,000 individuals all coming back to the border. So working with the non-government organizations, our international partners, Department of State, we were able to leverage facial biometric comparison technology using an app. Very excited. We're the federal government. I think we're a little behind on apps, but we're getting there, to take that process down to a mere matter of seconds to minutes, to process those individuals, making sure we knew who they were. We already had all of their information.
Well, right, and that's a good point. You already had the person's picture in the file, right? The government file contains the person's fingerprints and their picture. And really, when you're taking the new picture, it's just finding in that index who that file belongs to, right? You raise another great point at the airports and at the border. Facial recognition did not create a new requirement, right? It didn't create a new place where you had to establish your identity. Those requirements, those authorities, that legislation already existed. Like you said, you just automated a way that was done manually, but it didn't create a new document requirement. It's not like it's a public street, where if you're walking down the street, you don't have to show your identification in a public space, absent a law enforcement interaction with some articulable, probable cause, reasonable suspicion. Maybe a law enforcement encounter takes place, but in this case, there's already a requirement to establish who you are. You brought up the southwest border too. Congress was very generous to the Office of Field Operations and really appropriated hundreds of millions of dollars to recapitalize the non-intrusive inspection fleet, right? These are the big X-ray machines and other technologies, but we could image an entire, tractor trailer or passenger vehicle at once. But the limitations in the logistics and the time it took to do that, I think we were doing maybe 15% of the trucks coming across the southwest border and 1 or 2% of the passenger vehicles, maybe. But we looked at developing these new systems where you could actually drive through it, right? And you got to get the high energy and low energy because you have the driver in the vehicle or passengers. But we were looking at ways, could we get these rates up to potentially 100%? So what does the border then look like, right? What's the impact? How do you process all that data? And, I know we've been testing a few things down in South Texas, but how's all that been going, and what's the current thinking on a lot of it?
It's really exciting what the land border, in particular the southwest land border, is going to look like in the next 1 to 2 years. We did get to awarding the contracts for the multi-energy portals this past spring, and the low energy portals for the POVs, the privately owned vehicles, probably in the next few weeks, if not sooner. But it looks like we will be moving from about 1% in those privately owned vehicles to about 40% of the traffic based on what we were appropriated. And in the cargo environment, we could get up to see about 90% of that traffic scanned. And from contract to deployment and installation is anywhere from a 12 to 24 month process. So this is going to be ongoing for the next 2 years. I mean, the offset for savings for CBP is about $1 billion. But for the industry, in terms of what those delays could be, because if we rely on officers to do a manual search of a vehicle, because we don't have that technology in place, that could take 2 hours at times. That's being generous. It's not always going to take 2 hours. Either way, right? But we can get that down to 8 minutes with the non-intrusive technology. So the cost savings that translates to the trade could be anywhere from $5 billion to $17 billion, like offset because we're not delaying or we're not impeding commerce because we have that threat that we have to mitigate. And in addition to, as we deploy the non-intrusive technology, and again, we're not resourced yet for 100% scanning, we're going to get there, but it's not one size fits all. You're very familiar, all the different ports and the logistics that go into the throughput in the ports, inbound, outbound, the highways that go in. But at the same time that we're deploying the technology, we're really looking at, with respect to the data, how do we tie it all together for those individual units that come across, the passenger vehicle or the cargo vehicle, and how do we get an integrated data package into our officers, either through a command center or right at primary. So what we're looking at tying together, that when this scan happens, hopefully pre-primary, and that's the way it looks for most, we might get a little closer to primary in some locations, but we're going to be tying together, linking simplified arrival, which is the facial biometric comparison, the RFID technology that's going to be reading the documents that, for those ready lanes where we have the ability to do so, and also the radiation detection, so that by the time that individual, whether it's a truck driver coming over with a commercial vehicle or a privately owned vehicle, shows up at primary, that we have a full picture of that individual. I mean, sometimes people in CBP get mad at me when I say we don't have to talk to every single person that comes across, especially with the access to data that we have and this advanced information. And now painting this holistic picture for them of what's about to show up in front of them, running it through, and the testing down in South Texas. We have the feedback from the commercial drivers is that they're able to turn around 3 times in a day, which was unheard of previously. But that information all gets forwarded into the command center, it gets adjudicated, and we have to look at what's next with that data, right? Where's the AI piece of it? Because we still are relying on our officers and technicians to actually read the scans themselves. But what we should
have... Right, they're like radiologists going through.
Yes.
That little box is not supposed to be there.
They could tell you where the broken bones are. They could. Right. They're fantastic. But what we need is that automated, that artificial, intelligence to tell us, like, this Honda, 1996 Honda, something's different, right? And highlight those areas for us and really point us in the direction of those anomalies. That's really the next step.
So that's really interesting too, like to look at what should a 1995 Honda Accord look like when you x-ray it, right? And like, how do we use the automation to say, wait, this area has been modified, right? This shouldn't be here. Or the last time you saw this vehicle, it looked like this. Different. Now it looks like this, right? I think there's a whole world of possibilities there on the automation and just the interpretation, using the AI, right, to help interpret all those images. But that sounds like a lot of fun too. That's right. Flipping back to the airports, when we looked at the advantages the facial recognition brought, the automation, the touchless, like, what do the logistics look like? Mm-hmm. Like, where does baggage claim? Do you get your baggage first and then come to CBP? Do you put it down the hall? Do we even need to see the bags? Can you x-ray them overseas? So the physical layout of everything was still very much being developed. And it sounds like you have the same opportunity at the southwest border and then the northern land border, depending on what space is available. But maybe the logistics of how cars and trucks and people and trains and bicycles and everything else come through, it sounds like you'll work with the stakeholders to figure out different ways and the most efficient ways to get things through and stop the bad stuff that shouldn't get through, right?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges we have now, especially, is the facilities keeping up with the technology, right? And as new facilities come online, we really have to be forecasting far in advance. We have the agreement signed with Korea with respect to the receiving the X-ray scans from overseas of the baggage. What is that going to mean in the future? That's going to mean, unless we want to see a bag, they don't even have to come into the FIS. But that means a complete redesign potentially for what those federal inspections
if you're transiting, so I fly from Korea to JFK, I don't have to claim my baggage and physically present it to CBP, right? So you'll get the X-ray image of it, and the bag could be checked through to my domestic destination, so I can race to the gate and hop on the plane and not actually have to deal with the baggage. So that's a huge savings, time, money, and the airlines, and right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, other minor modifications that we're making to the process. You know, it's nice to be part of a federal agency that wants to shed paper, not touch it anymore.
Yes.
We want to get rid of stamps. We're going digital and really being able to forecast. And that means participating certainly in events like these, talking to our industry stakeholders and trying as desperately as we can to keep up with the private sector. Because, you know, in service to them, frankly, it's our responsibility.
Yeah. And not only a single form, but in the cases where we make them provide 4 copies of the form,
in
right?
Triplicate, right?
In triplicate, quadruplicate. But this, you know, this is what I really enjoyed about my career, and glad to see you in this position, and also so enthusiastic about the world of possibilities out there for CBP. You know, we're a 200-and-something-year-old agency going back to 1789, right? The beginnings of the country, and the Customs Service was built to collect tax revenue. And here you are a couple hundred years later and just still thinking of new and innovative and flexible ways to drive the economy and perform that safety and security law enforcement mission. So with that, I guess we will conclude. Any last thing to offer?
No, just to reiterate, it is an exciting time to be doing this, and it's hopefully before I retire we'll get to you never know what we'll be able to fully realize all of these efforts that are underway, but thanks to you and the service that you committed to, because we're where we are today because of those efforts, and it's exciting to be able to build on them and look to what's next.
Yeah, and I learned it from the people that came before me, right, and the people that came before them, and it's just a successive line of just great innovation, border management. So with that, thank you, everyone. It's been really great to see everyone again and meet in person, and we look forward to the next one. Thanks.